News Channel 8 is your local election headquarters, and here at Politics on Your Side, we try to introduce you to all the candidates running to represent you. This morning, we're joined by State Senator Greg Steube, who is running to be the U.S. Representative for Florida's District 17, which represents a whole lot of counties.
Yeah, it's the heartland of Florida.
Sarasota, Polk, parts of, and then all of Charlotte, DeSoto, Hardy, Highlands, and others. First of all, good morning to you.
Yeah, good morning to you.
Thanks so much for coming in. I wanted to ask you first, the passing of Barbara Bush this week, an icon in the Republican Party, one of only two women to be the mother of and the husband to a U.S. president. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, obviously, my thoughts and heart goes out to the Bush family. She just was an icon to Republicans and to women in our country. Some of the things, I read a quote this morning that she had said that no president can be president without God and praying to God, and her faith and her values, I think, speak to what we believe as Americans, and it's certainly a loss to our country, and my thoughts and prayers go out to the family. But she had just an incredible impact in our country, and both being the mother of a president and the wife of a president and a first lady, I think she served our country very, very well and is the epitome of what Americans should strive to be.
Yeah, and the mother of a governor right here in Florida, obviously, as well.
Yeah.
Greg, I want to talk to you about your career path a little bit. So you just switched from the House, the Florida House, to the Florida Senate in this last election cycle, 2016. You were elected to a 4-year term, which you'll now have to leave halfway through. What about your constituents who say you're abandoning them?
Well, this Senate district is about 56% of the congressional district that I'm running for. Congressman Rooney's district is in the Senate district that I'm running, that I represent. And I certainly didn't know, nor did many people know, that Congressman Rooney was not going to run for re-election. I certainly thought I was going to be in the Senate for 6 or 8 years, and had guided my thinking that that was going to happen. But when in politics, a lot of politics is timing. And when things happen, especially for a congressional seat, you have to take an opportunity when it's presented to you, because there's no term limits at the federal level. So a lot of congressmen stay there for a period of time. I certainly support term limits at the federal level, but I think it's something that is an opportunity. And with my background in service, I mean, I've always served my country in the state of Florida. After law school, I was in law school when September 11th occurred, and I decided to enlist and volunteer in the U.S. Army. I served 5 years on active duty, served in Operation Iraqi Freedom, and it was an honor to serve our country, and then came back and wanted to continue to serve, but in a different way. And I served in the House for 6 years, and then served in the state Senate these last 2 years. And I think we need people who have seen what we've done in the state level. So I've been in the legislature for 8 years, and in those 8 years, we've cut $10 billion in taxes. We put $3 billion in reserves. We've balanced our budget every single year. And I think that's the type of ideology and conservatism that we need at the federal level. I mean, Washington just passed and Congress just passed a $1.3 trillion bill, added $1 trillion to our debt. And that's something that we don't do at the state of Florida. And I think it's that type of leadership that we need to have at the federal level.
How do you marry that up as well? I mean, that is kind of a frustration, I think, for a lot of conservatives, because they say, look, we're controlling both houses, and we've got the White House, and we just passed this massive tax cut that's going to detrimentally impact our deficit and moving forward.
Most conservatives in Congress voted against that spending bill because of that. And so in order to get it passed, they had to put so much pork inside this bill to get Democrats to support it. You know, things to get other votes across the aisles, to all sorts of different programs that we shouldn't be funding, because we should be focused on what we as Americans should be focused on, and that's building our economy and cutting taxes and cutting regulations. And we've done that for the last 8 years in the state of Florida. And so if we can do it in Florida, the third largest state in the country, we can do it at the national level. It just takes people that are strong and principled and be willing to say enough is enough. Washington is broken, and we need to go up there and have people go up there that are willing to fix it.
Is it possible to pass a balanced budget amendment to make that happen?
I 100% support that. Vern Buchanan has had that bill for a couple of years. I think that is the first step in getting to a point where we can say, okay, now our hands are tied and we can't spend more than we're bringing in. And I think that's a good first step. But we really need more conservatives that are willing to go up there and make the tough decisions. When I first got elected, we had to cut my first 2 years, and I was in the House, and I sat on appropriations committees. We had to cut $6 billion in taxes because in Florida we balance our budget every year. So if we didn't have enough income to cover our expenses, we had to cut, and we had to make tough choices and tough decisions on what we cut out of $6 billion of an 80-something billion dollar budget, but we did it. And we have a triple A bond rating in the state of Florida because of it. We have reserves because of it. And if you look at the unemployment rate is an all-time low, all these different factors that make Florida one of the best states, if not the best state in the country, for businesses and for people to live, work, and play. And I think that's that example that we need that type of leadership in Washington.
What else will you champion when you get there if you were to win? What other bills would you introduce? What's important?
Well, you know, being a military veteran, being a veteran of Operation Iraqi Freedom, being a disabled veteran, and having seen the real problems that we have in the VA, I think we need somebody with that type of background, both from a national security standpoint, to be able to give Trump the type of advice that he needs coming from people who have been and served overseas on national security, on things that we can do to fix the VA. There are so many things that I think we can do as a country to get better medical care for our veterans and at the same time save billions of dollars in taxpayer dollars.
You are a U.S. Army veteran. Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Infantryman as well as the JAG attorney. This was something that happened recently. Obviously, if President Trump were to come to you and say, I would like your support on a resolution to go to war against Syria, would you vote yes or no?
Well, I think the steps that the president have made have been very, very strong. You have a leader in Assad that is killing his own people. And we as a country can't allow innocent people and children. I mean, you've probably seen the photos. We've all seen the photos of these children that have been gassed by Assad's regime. And Iran is help funneling that through things that the Obama administration did in funneling $150 billion to Iran. And now they're using that money to fund terrorism. And those are the kind of things that having someone like myself with my type of military background to be able to support the president on the decisions that he makes and give him advice as to the way things work in the Middle East, I think is very important.
I'm going to pin you down, Greg, though. Yes or no? Would you vote to go to war against Syria?
I would vote to support the president on whatever decision he makes. They obviously have a lot more intelligence and are briefed on things that we are not privy to. So I don't know all the things that are happening on the ground like the president does. But if that's the decision that the president makes, leaning on his military advisors, I would 100% support that.
And fair enough. You would learn more about that, obviously, if you were a member of Congress.
Absolutely.
And that was to come to you. You sponsored the bill that would make daylight saving year-round here in Florida. Is that something you're going to introduce in Congress?
Well, yes. And what's crazy is the amount of feedback that we got from Floridians on that bill.
Probably more than almost anything except for the Parkland bills.
Absolutely, 100%. And it's kind of interesting. I mean, I think that the whole country should be on one time and we don't go back and forth. And what's interesting is this all came to me. I went to the barber after we turned the clocks back, and she has young children, and she said, you know, it takes them 2 weeks to get adjusted to the time change. Why are we doing this? Is there something you can do? And I said, well, I'm happy to file the bill, and let's see what happens. And then there was this huge outpouring of support to stay in daylight savings time. The only, I guess you would say, opposition to it was, well, if we're in daylight savings time year round, but the rest of the eastern seaboard is going back and forth, there'll be time difference if we're doing business in New York or Washington or whatever the case may be. But I absolutely think that Congress should have us in one time period. And what's interesting is if you know the history as to why we as a country started it, over 100 years ago.
Not farmers.
Yeah, had nothing to do with farmers and everything to do with conserving fuel during the First World War. Well, we obviously don't have those constraints now, so why are we going back and forth twice a year and changing our clocks? And I think I would absolutely support it nationwide.
What would you say to the people who, I've had parents reach out to me and say, look, this is going to make my kids waiting in the dark in the morning for the school bus or walking to school even more dangerous because now there'll be even more days where they're in the dark. How would you respond to them? You
can move the times up. Each school district can move the times up of when the schools start. So it's very easy. Each school district decides what time their children go to school. And so if it is that much of a detriment and it is that much more dark during that period of time, you could just move the time start of school up.
Okay. Let's get to President Trump. You have been a defender of President Trump, saying when you announced your candidacy, I will proudly support Trump and his agenda in Washington.
Absolutely.
Does any of his behavior bother you? I mean, the recent attacks against the media, against law enforcement, the affair with porn star, the alleged affairs, other affairs, and sexual assaults.
Right. I support his agenda and the things that he's done. I mean, you look at, we have a historic unemployment rate with African Americans, and that is because of Trump's agenda in cutting taxes, cutting regulation, and getting people back to work. And that's what we've done here in the state of Florida and been so effective. And that's why I want to go to D.C., because D.C. is broken. And I think we need more people that see that we need these type of policies at the national level.
But those things don't bother you?
Well, they bother me personally, of course. I don't support the type of personal activities that he has had, but I support what he's done as president and the policies that he's put in place.
Okay. After you announced your candidacy, the Orlando Weekly said you have been, quote, most known trying to make NRA lobbyist Marion Hammer's dreams a reality, end quote. You've introduced numerous pro-gun bills, not only access to weapons, but allowing concealed carry permit holders to hold private businesses liable, sue if they're injured in any shootings, allow carry holders to access to college campuses, schools, government meetings, as we discussed just a minute ago, airport terminals. Why is more guns the answer? So a lot of research shows that when there are more guns present, there is more danger.
There is, well, and I'll tell you another fact. In the state of Florida, we've had concealed carry for almost 29, 30 years now. And in that period of time, if you look statistically at how likely it is for a concealed license permit holder to commit a misdemeanor or felony compared to a law enforcement officer, concealed license permit holders are 8 to 10 times less likely to commit a crime than a certified law enforcement officer. So if you're comfortable with a law enforcement officer wearing a uniform and carrying a gun, you should be 8 to 10 times more comfortable with a licensed concealed permit carry holder carrying a gun. You will not find a stronger supporter of the Second Amendment in the state of Florida than me. All of the bills that you just mentioned. I think if you look at the shootings, the mass shootings that we've had in the state of Florida, they all only have one thing in common. And that one thing in common is that every single one of the mass shootings have occurred in a gun-free zone. And a lot of the bills that I've put forward has been to eliminate gun-free zones, to allow law-abiding citizens who have a concealed carry permit, who have gone through all the necessary background checks and training to carry in defense of themselves and others. And I don't think that we as Americans and we as Floridians should have to hide behind a desk or a chair and wait for law enforcement to arrive.
Last question for you, Greg. The bills passed in Florida will, after Parkland, will allow guns to be taken out of the hands of people who are deemed dangerous. How do you guarantee your constituents that their Second Amendment rights will still be protected? There are a lot of people who are upset about that and think that, people might come in and get their guns. And who's going to come get their guns? If someone is deemed to be dangerous, who's going to walk in the door and make sure they get all the guns out of that person's hands and home?
I think we all agree that we do not want the mentally ill to have firearms and access to firearms. We all agree with that. And one of the reasons why I voted against this bill that was passed was because of this piece of it. There's no ability for the judge to decide things on the front end of taking your weapons. It's on the back end. And I think there's some real constitutional issues there. Not just your constitutional rights under the Second Amendment, but your constitutional rights under the Fourth Amendment. So under the bill that passed, if any law enforcement officer has any belief that you are going to be a harm to yourself or others, they can take your firearms. And then once they take your firearms and your ammunition, then you, let's say they Baker Act you and you have your psychological evaluation and they check you and you're fine and they release you, well, now all of your guns and firearms and ammunition is with law enforcement. Now you have to hire a lawyer, go before a judge, petition the court to get your property back. And I think that's terribly problematic. It allows law enforcement to take your property without a warrant and without probable cause. And everything under the Fourth Amendment is allowing individuals that protection so that there must be probable cause and there must be a warrant to take your property. And now we're allowing law enforcement under one person's determination, not having to do a check, to be able to take your firearms and your ammunition. And I think that's constitutionally problematic. All of us agree that we don't want mentally ill to get their hands on firearms. And let's figure out a way that we can do that. I don't know if this is going to accomplish that.
State Senator Greg Steube, candidate for 17th District of Florida. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thanks for having me. I
really appreciate you being here. We'll be right back, folks.